In our last video for this chapter, we are going to start off talking about describing why we're going to describe antibiotics, and we're going to explain why bacteria, but not viruses, can often be controlled by antibiotics. So an antibiotic, I think sometimes people get this mixed up with an antibody. An antibody is a protein made by some of our white blood cells to fight off pathogens in our body. An antibody, which we are not talking about, are proteins that fight off pathogens in our body. They're made by our white blood cells. An antibiotic is a drug that's produced in a lab or produced by a company or whatever. So an antibiotic is a drug used to treat a bacterial infection. And we've got lots and lots of antibiotics. They work by killing the bacteria or inhibiting their growth. Now, when an antibiotic kills a bacteria, it disrupts the cell structure and the metabolism or the metabolism. Remember that bacteria are cells. Viruses are not. Viruses are really just these complex chemicals. So if you're going to disrupt cell structure, viruses are not cells. So you can't disrupt the virus structure with an antibiotic. Metabolism's all the chemical reactions in the cell. Viruses don't have a metabolism. They go inside of a host cell and they benefit from the cell's metabolism. So antibiotics disrupt cell structure and metabolism, neither of which a virus possesses. So antibiotics affect bacteria, but not viruses. So we've got lots of antibiotics available. And if you get a bacterial infection, there'll likely be an antibiotic that can help you out. There's not antibiotics sitting around for viruses. We have some specially tailored antiviral drugs that can be used for certain viruses, but we don't have antibiotics per se. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a big problem in medicine and human biology, and that's antibiotic resistance. So I want to summarize how bacteria can become resistant to antibiotics. So I just told you that you get a bacterial infection, you can take one of these drugs, an antibiotic, and you've heard of penicillin and tetracycline and methicillin and cephalosporin. There's all sorts of antibiotics. And so your doctor might give you an antibiotic, and that will kill the bacteria. But what we're finding is many bacteria are becoming antibiotic resistant, which means an antibiotic no longer controls the growth of bacteria. And this is going to get you into what we talked about last week when we talked about natural selection. Remember, we said evolution is driven by natural selection, survival of the fittest. The organism that can survive, we've got genetic variety in a population, and so we all have a little bit different traits and a little bit of a different ability in different areas. And so when we're put under stress, the fittest ones survive, the fastest, or the one that can survive survive hunger the longest. Those kinds of things. The ones that can that have this slower metabolism or can eat new foods or whatever it is. The fittest one is going to survive. So using antibiotics provides natural selection for antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So let's look at this picture. If each one of these dots is a bacteria, and we said this, bacteria have, just like all organisms, have genetic variety. So these two organisms have genes in them that make them resistant, make them able to resist being killed by an antibiotic. All the other ones, they're susceptible. If they get exposed to an antibiotic, they're gonna die. But these two, just by accident, have mutations that made them resistant to this particular antibiotic. So when you treat this population with antibiotics, you're going to kill most of the sensitive ones. And the resistant ones are going to survive. And those resistant ones are going to reproduce. Now they're the dominant ones in the group. And you're going to end up with a population with way more resistant bacteria than sensitive. We just saw survival of the fittest in action. The fittest ones in this case are the ones that are resistant. And when that population is treated with an antibiotic and you kill out the ones that are less fit, the fittest ones are going to dominate in the population. That's how we get a population that was sensitive to an antibiotic becoming primarily resistant to an antibiotic. So what happens when we get our population goes from being sensitive to an antibiotic to resistant? Well, the infections get harder to treat. You take your antibiotic, but the bacteria are still there. So we need to take a different antibiotic. And what can happen is we can end up getting MDRO, multi-drug resistant organisms. And this would be a bacterium that's resistant to multiple antibiotics. This is becoming a big problem because penicillin used to be used for penicillin was the only antibiotic at one point, starting in the 1940s. It was our first antibiotic and it was the only one. So if you became resistant to penicillin, there was nothing you could do. So gradually we made more and more antibiotics. And then that penicillin-resistant organism became resistant to streptomycin. It became resistant to a new antibiotic. And so by using antibiotics, we've developed multi-drug resistant organisms. So I wanted to give you some example of some of these multi-drug resistant organisms and things that you can relate to. And we've all heard of staph infections. If you get an infection in your skin, a lot of times it's caused by Staphylococcus aureus. It's the name of a bacterium. Staphylococcus aureus is the name of a bacterium. It's really common. 30% or more of us have Staphylococcus aureus on our skin. A lot of us have it or in our nasal cavity. It likes to kind of hang out in your nose. Not everybody has it, but a lot of people do. It's around. But most of those people are not sick. It's just there. It's not causing any problem at all. But if it gets out of balance, maybe you get a wound or you get sick with something else or just, I don't know, something gets out of balance with your microorganisms, you can get infections. And so this would be a boil. It's like a big pus-filled lump, and it's painful. That's caused by Staphylococcus aureus. It's an infection under the skin. You might have seen something like this. It's called impetigo. It is again, a staph infection of the skin. You can see the pus kind of coming out of there. This one, just really red, tender skin like that, is called cellulitis. You don't need to know all these, but I just want to give you some things that you could relate to, that you might have heard of. This is where the staph bacteria are growing in the connective tissue underneath the skin. And that could be a potentially really dangerous infection because Staph aureus can also grow in the blood and spread through the body and cause very serious problems. But most of the people that are carrying Staph aureus with them don't have these problems. It's just there. It's normal. It's not making them sick or anything. But if you do get an infection from it, you probably need to take an antibiotic. So it usually is cured with antibiotics. You get a boil, they'll treat that with an antibiotic. But turns out that's happened so often that resistance is becoming very common. And we now have this relatively new organism. I think it came around like in the 1980s, but it's becoming more and more common. It's called MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. MRSA is methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. So it's resistant to the antibiotic that used to control it. And so what do you do? Well, the treatment's more complex. You have to try different kinds of antibiotics. Sometimes, certain ones work, other ones don't. and sometimes you use multiple antibiotics. Often it takes longer to cure the infection, but you just want to stay right on top of it. We're at the point that about 45% of staph infections in the U.S. that used to be easily cured now are MRSA and take a little bit more effort. So we hear more and more about MRSA over the years, and it's definitely like the Centers for Disease Control keeps an eye on MRSA data and tries to make sure we prevent the spread of that. And there's a lot of precautions in hospitals to prevent the spread of MRSA. If you or anybody you know have gone in for surgery, they might have swabbed your nose before you went under surgery because they want to know, do you carry MRSA? That's what they're looking for. I just wanted to show you this. I'm not going to quiz you on this, but I want you to understand the concept. So any infection, like if it's a staph infection, there's like tier 1 antibiotics. Like if you have a staph infection, but it's not antibiotic resistant, this says methicillin sensitive staph aureus. This is like normal staph aureus, no drug resistance. One of these antibiotics is going to be used to kill it, and it will probably work fine. But if these antibiotics aren't working, then it goes into tier 2. And that's where we would call it MRSA, methicillin-resistant antibiotic. And they try things like vancomycin. And for some patients, that doesn't work. So you have to go to the higher level antibiotics. And then there's the last resort antibiotics. And these different tiers of antibiotics are known for different organisms. And these are, physicians follow these guidelines because we don't want to use these higher tier antibiotics if we don't have to. Because remember, the use of the antibiotic is what's selected for the antibiotic resistant organisms. Using an antibiotic provides natural selection for antibiotic resistant bacteria. So we try to save antibiotics and only use them as a last resort. So we have MRSA as an example. The other example I wanted to give you is Mycobacterium tuberculosis. This is also a bacterium, and it causes the disease tuberculosis, which probably most of us have heard of. This is a disease that's been documented for thousands of years. It's been around for a really long time. It's a respiratory disease. It's transmitted by the air, and it's very contagious. So it's very easy, if somebody has active tuberculosis, which they're showing you on this x-ray, here's the bacteria, this blue cells clumped together, they're bacillus shaped, look at that. And if it grows in the lungs, and when it's active, you can see these kind of, structures in the lungs that they're called tubercles, but you see them in the lungs under an x-ray. And regular old Mycobacterium tuberculosis, if they figure out you have it, it actually is curable. There's antibiotics that treat it, but it takes 6 to 9 months. It's hard to get these. The bacteria kind of hides out in the lungs. It's hard to get all the bacteria. It is curable in 6 to 9 months. Tuberculosis is the leading cause of death from an infectious agent worldwide. It's a big deal. Tuberculosis is the leading cause of death from an infectious agent worldwide. Now, it's not a huge problem in the U.S. Currently. There's maybe like 500 deaths in the U.S. yearly. But look at that, 1.5 million deaths a year. These are the primary countries: India, Indonesia, China, Philippines, Pakistan, Nigeria, Bangladesh, South Africa. But because it's there, it can come to the U.S. on an airplane very easily. The reason why I'm talking about it in this section, though, we're talking about antibiotic resistance, is they're finding MDR-TB, multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, is a big concern worldwide. There's another level, so we have multi-drug resistant TB. It's resistant to at least 2 of the most important first-tier anti-tuberculosis drugs. We also have one called XDR, extensively drug-resistant tuberculosis, and is also as resistant to at least, that should say, one second-tier drug. Extensively drug-resistant TB is more resistant and severe of a form and requires more complex and longer treatment regimes than multi-drug resistant. And when we're looking at multi-drug and extensively drug-resistant TB, these are taking 18 to 24 months, a year and a half to 2 years to cure patients. And we're talking about a respiratory disease that's transmitted by air. You just cough into the air and people next to you breathe it in, and it's very contagious. So you can imagine that a deadly disease that now is becoming resistant to antibiotics, think about how hard it is. Here they're saying you can cure tuberculosis in 6 to 9 months. That means you have to take your antibiotics on a regular basis for 6 to 9 months. Oh, and don't forget to take it because it's going to come back and it could be worse. What if it takes 18 to 24 months? And what if you live in, a country where there's not good public health and you can't afford the drug, or it's not available, or there's enough, other problems that you just can't get the drug. So you can imagine taking a drug for 18 to 24 months to kill a really dangerous disease, pathogen could be really, really challenging. Even though we have relatively few cases of tuberculosis in the U.S., we still screen for it. Nurses need to get TB tests before they work in the hospital to make sure they're not going to spread it. Anybody from a country other than, from some country where they pick it up can get on a plane and spread it to the U.S. at any time. So it's something that we need to do. Remember when we said, how do we stop the spread of diseases? We do surveillance and quarantine and all that. There's not an effective tuberculosis vaccine. So that's not on the table right now. There are some tuberculosis vaccines that are kind of, maybe they work, maybe they don't, but there's not a truly effective one. So a extensively drug-resistant TB could change everything if this was not under control. This is where extensively drug-resistant TB has been detected. So it has been detected in the U.S. and Canada, in North America, Mexico, but we don't have, it's something that's been contained. But you can see it's been in a lot of different countries, and this is the potential for this becoming a big deal. It's always out there. So I think that's the end. So we're at the end of this whole unit.